just historically speaking, we can cover this next time a little bit more. This country is built on immigrants. The Irish, the Spanish, the Italians, and all the shit they went through to get here. Not to mention the Chinese and the Japanese and all the shit they went through to get here. We used to have a law called the Chinese Exclusion Act.
That's racist even by title.
No, but that's just how it goes. But a lot of this also blends into this concept of racism and how it bleeds into sort of economic thinking and how it has in the past is this idea that somehow these groups are inferior or they're lazy or they don't work as hard, so they're a burden, right? Or the immigrants are coming to take your jobs and shit like that, but they're lazy. I mean, it gets confusing, right? So I just wanted to look at here's a quick article from, I think this one's from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. And they just talk about race and racism and economics. If you haven't, it's an older article from the 2020, but it's really good. But it's pretty basic. But they go back to this. So the field of economics has been far from immune from discrimination and racism. George Stigler in 1982, he won the Nobel Prize. But he used to argue in the 65 that black people were inferior as workers and that the solution was fostering willingness to work hard. Right?
Well, gee, that doesn't sound a lot like slavery.
Well, but how many times do we do this?
What? I mean, like, not work hard? Are you freaking kidding me?
Yeah, but that's the point.
The jobs that they were crammed into, even post-slavery, I know I was making a little commentary there, but even post that era, look at the kinds of jobs that they sort of got stuck with. They were nothing but very, very difficult.
Well, but think about this. So, like, was it Oklahoma City? No, it was Tulsa, Oklahoma, right? And there was, after the Civil War, there was Tulsa was mostly black. And you had doctors and lawyers, and I mean, they had a whole freaking city. It was predominantly black and black-owned businesses, right? And then what happened? A bunch of white people came in, and they had planes and stuff, and this was like in 1910 or whatever, and they pushed all the black people out and just took their shit and put in a white government. The only coup on American soil, I can look this up. I didn't even think about this before. I should have. I can't even remember where it was basically the KKK moved into a town, pushed all the black people out. So to sit there and say they're lazy and they're not good workers, no, there was a time when they were doing really well in the early 20th century. And then we got suppressed, and then we imposed segregation and all that shit. And then it made it really hard. But it's not like they weren't working. That's the stupid part of this. And you can't say that about, like, okay, this group works harder than this group. It's just a stupid thing to say. There's always going to be some lazy shits in every group. So you can pull out anecdotes till the end of time. I know a butt ton of lazy Asian and white people. And yet we always seem to be the top of the heap. Right? As somebody who's both. Right? But it's not the reality. I mean, the reality is that's true, but statistically, but a lot of that's because a lot of Asian and white people come from money. They come from
starting with the advantage.
Right.
Starting from a better lot.
And when I say Asian, I mean East Asian. I don't mean Pacific Islander. Those guys have it harder. But how hard, I want to stick to that phrase, the willingness to work hard. They don't have it. How often do we hear that statement or something similar to that? People are just lazy. They don't believe in effort. They don't believe in...
That doesn't sound like any of the things we bring on this show, does it?
Every week? Like no, we've never heard that before from Fox News or Dave Ramsey or CNBC. We've never heard that, except for every fucking week.
to buckle down and work harder.
That's why I wanted to show you that, Lace, because we do this every week. We hear that, and we kept doing the joke about, oh, they think that, it's a Worthington's law that wealth equals better than, and all this shit. But we didn't realize that this is rooted in fucking racism from the 20th century. This is deeply rooted in racism from the 20th century. And it's moved on, and I want to go through the rest of this article because they kind of talk about academics has moved on from this shit. So, like, here's a good example: race and topics. Race in the red here, gender, poverty, income distribution, right, versus capital asset pricing, market liquidity, and monetary policy. These are the topics of most articles. The ones that are the least talked about in finance and economics.
They're the systemic issues.
Right. And it's interesting about that. So
the only topics they really want to talk about are, scroll back up to that.
Yeah. Hang on a second. Yeah, go ahead.
So, capital asset pricing, market liquidity, monetary policy. So, they want to go ahead and attack these what you can do with your money topics, but they don't want to attack any. This isn't really a do; it's a systemic thing.
Or what do you do if you don't have money issues? Because of these problems.
Not that either. They're not touching anything systemic, and they're certainly not touching the if you actually just don't have it. The things that they're touching are what you actually can do, and if you already are in a have category.
Right. Exactly. So they were looking at this in economics institutions, academics, and policymaking. Like, the first steps is to create a safe environment to talk about these things: racism, raise awareness, provide mandatory bias training, including those that are unconscious. Rooting out discrimination starts by acknowledging that a problem exists. That's a great sentence. We have to acknowledge that there's we have to acknowledge
there are systemic problems.
Right. You can't start curing your cancer until you acknowledge I have cancer.
Well, we haven't been saying that for weeks and weeks and weeks, have we?
No. So, Ijeoma Oluo, I hope I pronounced it right, in her 2019 New York Times bestseller, So You Want to Talk About Race, that we filter information through our own experiences to assess the validity of biases. So she's basically saying the same thing I did, which is race is, like she says, race is not a universal experience. So if you have a bunch of white guys writing these papers, they're probably not going to think of it. Right? So their whole point is to make progress. Economists need to further broaden their perspective. Right? We need to start looking at this in a larger way. And it's starting to happen. And they talk a little bit more about, like, Black Lives has really kind of pushed economics into this forefront of, well, maybe we should look at how race really does affect these people, especially when you get that many people, fighting us, right, in protesting in the streets. But I want to look at one more thing. So let's see. So there's that. So just so you can see how it applies to racism, because I know some of you are going to argue, well, that doesn't seem that it's racist. It's just people don't want to work and they're lazy. And it's like, no, here's how it applies directly. And once again, if you want to argue, email me. We will have you on the show if you want to argue with us. I'd like to see somebody with the balls to finally do it. Here we go. Labor force participation. So I just pulled this from BLS reports, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, right? So labor participation has actually been pretty good overall. It's gotten better and better with lots of different groups, right? However, education attainment. White people tend to get bachelor's degrees. The gray here. Can you see that well enough?
Yep.
So white people tend to get bachelor's degrees more. Associate's degrees have low dropout rates. Black people, less likely to get a bachelor's degree.
So that's the second row there.
Yep. Asians, oh my gosh, almost all of us, right? like almost 70% of us, 68%, get a bachelor's degree or higher. And our less than high school is almost nothing. Hispanic and Latino, very small. So there's still racial inequity in college there, right? And in education. Because the light blue here is high school graduation, which oddly is higher for African Americans, but it's really low for Latinos, right? So I'm going to skip down here. But here's where it gets it. Unemployment. White people, very low. Asian people, very low. Black people, almost double what it is for white and Asians. American Indian, Native American, Alaskan Native, pretty high. Hawaiian.
I have to say, that one doesn't surprise me with the whole reservation situation. I mean,
yep.
They didn't put a lot of opportunities out there for them.
Yeah, but who's the highest? Black people.
Yeah.
So when they sit there and go, okay, well, wait a second. It's because you're not working hard, right? And then I can go, well, wait. Black people have the highest unemployment rate, so they must be the most lazy. They must be the ones that aren't willing to work. That was the thinking in the 60s and the 70s. And that's a lot of what goes on still today. You'll still hear people do what's called 1350. And what they're talking about is black people are only 13% of the population, but they get tagged for like 50% of the crimes. Well, is that because they're over-policed as a race? Or is that because black people are just more criminal? Is it because black people had to deal with slavery and then segregation and have only really had civil rights to a degree, because there's still a lot of voting rights issues and things like that target black people? Has it been that they've been oppressed for so long they can't get ahead financially, so they're more apt to be in a position to be lower income and commit crimes because they're desperate for money? Could that be it? Or is it just because there's something wrong with black people? That's the difference in the argument. The right, the conservatives, they're saying, well, they're just lazy, they're not willing to work. There's something wrong with them. So then what I can say is, look, and you'll love this because you've taught Martin Luther King, and he hated the I Had a Dream speech. He denounced it after he did it because this is what happened. People start saying, well, we judge people not by the color of their skin, but the contents of their character. And since black people commit all the crimes and have the highest unemployment rate, black people must have bad character. So I'm not being racist when I say that, because I'm not judging them by their skin, by their character. Not acknowledging that that situation is caused by, centuries of systemic oppression, and that it's been impossible for them to make money and get ahead and collect generational wealth like white people. Do you see how easy that is to make that correlation and ignore the causation completely? That's the problem we keep running into with this, well, if you're poor, it's because you're lazy. That's an old racism trope. And that's why Martin Luther King Jr. later on denounced that shit and said, hey, I that dream I had became a nightmare, because that's what all these fucking racists did with it. They took it, ran with it. That's why when you hear people on Fox News and stuff, well, aren't we past racism? Martin Luther King Jr. said, and they only have the one quote. They never quote his, where do we go from here? They never quote his last book. They never quote anything else. They never acknowledge that he wrote or said anything else.
They never quote anything from Letter from Birmingham
Jail.
Right.
Yeah, according to Martin Luther King.
Letter from Birmingham Jail, King said,
yeah. They never, no, it's just Martin Luther King Jr. once said, I have a dream, and that's it, and he never said anything else. So that's where it turns into sort of systemic racism about if you're not rich or you haven't succeeded, it's because you're just not trying hard enough. Well, that's easy when you've oppressed somebody for so long, and then you tell them you're not trying hard enough. Literally, I'm sitting down with a fixed deck, and we're playing poker, and I keep asking you about why aren't you winning? I already rigged the game so I can win. And you keep losing, and I'm like, well, it must be because you're a loser. Because there's something wrong with you. No. So that's kind of my take on that. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that, or you should have it. But I want to look at this real quick. Robert Reich talks about the same issue in economics, because this has been a big thing now, or not now, but in the last decade or so. But watch him do this.
I keep hearing no one wants to work anymore. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, corporate America's biggest lobbying group, claims there are over 10 million job openings right now in the United States for which employers can't find workers. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell says the U.S. is dealing with a structural labor shortage. But here's the truth. There is no labor shortage. There is, however, a shortage of jobs paying sufficient wages to attract workers to fill them. When a problem is wrongly described, the solutions posed often turn out to be equally wrong. For most Americans, real inflation-adjusted wages continue to drop. Any pay increases workers may have earned in the past few years have actually been pay cuts because wages have lagged behind the rising costs of basic necessities like housing, food, childcare, and healthcare. Now, you don't have to be a financial wizard to see why some workers might say, the hell with it. So, what should be done about the difficulty employers are having finding workers? Simple. If employers want more workers, they should pay them more. Many corporations are...
And he's right. That's it.
So, in other words, we don't want your shitty-ass job. We don't want your shitty-ass job. You know, I once made a joke to somebody that I won't say the dollar amount because that's almost arbitrary, but I said, if it's not more than blank dollars an hour, it's not worth me putting pants on for.
Right.
I mean, and that's kind of true. And we want to complain about people not wanting to work, but the truth of the matter is, actually having a job isn't completely free to you.
No.
You have to transport yourself to it. If you have children, you have to make sure your children are covered. And if you don't have family that can just grab your kids from school and whatever, like you have to do all of that. Like, there's actually costs to having a job.
Right.
And quite frankly, at certain wages, it doesn't even pay to put pants on.
No.
You might as well just be at home. Nobody wants your shitty job.
No. No, not at all.
And with your jobs that don't tend to have much future either, unless you're just dying to be in management in whichever business it is.
Yeah.
You know, you're not really working very far up. Maybe you can become a manager of whichever sort of company it is, but otherwise it's just a shitty ass job. And then when you work your way into management, you kind of get stuck there. You can't really do much else.
Yep. Then you get stuck in all the salary problems where you have to work extra hours and all that shit.
Right. And then you're actually working for less, even though you're having more in terms of your salary, but they just like, well, now you can just work 80 hours a week. That's great.
Yeah, pretty much. I agree with you completely. I think that he's right. And I think the problem is that, once again, you can't say it's because of generation, or you can't say it's because of a race, or you can't say it's because of immigrants. The bottom line is you have a job shortage because you're not paying. Right? And we'll get into a little bit more of that in a second. But I want to...
They want a living wage.
Yep.
They want some health insurance.